mother-in-law told me I was no longer welcome at Sunday dinners, I was still paying her car insurance. Not metaphorically, not contributing to the household in some vague, untrackable way. I mean her actual Geico bill, $214 a month, set to auto-draft from my personal checking account every third Friday, along with the cable, the water softener subscription, 2 streaming services she used and one she didn't, and half the mortgage on a house where I apparently didn't belong anymore. My name is Claudia. I'm 31, I work in healthcare compliance, and for 2.5 years I was the financial backbone of a household that never once thanked me for it. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he still was, had been laid off 14 months into our marriage. Not fired, laid off. Which matters to him and matters to me in different ways. To him it meant he was blameless. To me it meant I stepped up without being asked, because that's what you do. You cover the gap. You don't make someone feel small for a bad quarter and a round of cuts. What I didn't expect was for the gap to become the whole floor. We moved in with his mother because it made sense on paper. She had the space, we had the debt. His sister had just moved out, so there was a full bedroom available, and his mother made it sound like a temporary arrangement that would benefit everyone. She kept saying, "It's family," like that was an answer to a question nobody had asked yet. I want to be fair here. The first few months were fine. His mother, I'll call her. My mother-in-law is not a stupid woman. She's organized and clean, and she makes good coffee, and she never once raised her voice at me in the beginning. What she did instead was quieter. She rearranged things. She mentioned things. She had a way of saying "we" that always meant her and her son and occasionally her other daughter, never me. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was an adjustment period. Meanwhile, I was covering $7,200 a month. Mortgage was $850, utilities averaged $380. Groceries I did myself because otherwise we'd eat frozen lasagna every night, so that was another $600, easy. His mother's car insurance. Her phone plan, which she'd been on ours since month 2 because it's just simpler this way. A new hot water heater in month 4 that I paid for in full because the timing was bad and nobody else had the cash. His therapy appointments, which I encouraged and funded because I genuinely wanted him to get better and get back on his feet. His sister visited twice, and both times I stocked the house before she arrived without being asked or reimbursed. I didn't keep a spreadsheet at the time. I should have. I kept it in my head instead, in the way you keep things when you believe they'll eventually balance out. They didn't balance out. What happened instead was a Tuesday night in October. His mother had made pot roast, which she only did when she wanted the table to feel important, and after dinner, while my husband was loading the dishwasher, she asked me to sit with her in the living room. She folded her hands in her lap the way people do when they've rehearsed what they're about to say. She told me she'd been thinking. She told me that my sister-in-law and her boyfriend were serious now, that they were talking about next steps, and that the house made the most sense for them because it was already set up for a family and it was close to his job. She said it gently. She said she hoped I understood. She said she and I both knew that my husband and I weren't quite ready for that chapter yet, and it would probably be good for us to have our own space anyway. I sat there looking at the lamp she picked out with my credit card. She kept talking. She said I had time. She said there was no rush. She said she knew change was hard, but she really did think it would be good for everyone. I said okay. I said I understood. I smiled the way you smile when you're processing something your brain hasn't fully caught up with yet. She patted my hand and went to bed at 9:30. I sat in that living room for another hour by myself. My husband came in eventually, saw my face, and asked if everything was okay. I said his mother had just asked us to move out. He said, yeah, he knew. She'd mentioned it to him earlier that week. He said he figured we'd talk about it this weekend. He'd known for days. He'd said nothing. I went upstairs and lay on top of the covers with my shoes still on and stared at the ceiling and did the math. Not the emotional math, the actual math. 2.5 years, 30 months, $7,200 a month. I didn't sleep much. But here's what I did do. I got very calm. There is a kind of calm that comes after a certain type of hurt, not the soft calm of acceptance, but the sharp calm of clarity, where everything stops being complicated and becomes extremely simple. I felt that settle over me somewhere around 2 a.m., and it didn't leave. The next morning I got up early, made coffee, kissed my husband on the cheek when he came downstairs, and waited until his car pulled out of the driveway. Then I called a moving company. I didn't call the cheap one. I called the full-service one, the kind where they bring the boxes and the paper and the wardrobe crates and they do everything, because I had enough money to do it right and enough anger to not care what it cost. They said they could be there by 11. I said, perfect. I went upstairs and started organizing what was mine, which was more than anyone in that house understood. The sectional in the living room, mine. I picked it out, paid for it, and my name was on the receipt. The kitchen table, mine, bought to replace the folding card table that had been there when we moved in. The good set of pots and pans, mine, a birthday gift to myself that I'd brought from my old apartment. The standing lamp in the corner, mine. The bedroom furniture except the mattress frame, which had been his mother's, mine. The smart thermostat I'd installed, mine. The Ring doorbell, mine. The movers arrived at 10:58. I had them start in the living room. By 1 in the afternoon the house had a different sound, hollow. Rooms that had been warm and full were suddenly just walls and floors. I watched a guy carry out the kitchen table and thought about all the dinners I'd cooked and set on it, and I didn't feel sad. I felt correct. My mother-in-law came home at 2:15. She worked half days on Wednesdays. I had not planned around this. I didn't avoid it either. She came through the front door and stopped. The living room was empty, not rearranged, not shifted, empty. She looked at me, her mouth opened and closed once. "What is going on?" she said. I told her I was moving out, like she'd suggested. She said this wasn't what she meant. She said she meant in a few weeks. She said there was a process. She said she never meant for me to just take everything. I said, everything here is mine. She said that wasn't true. She said some of this furniture had been here for years. I walked her to the kitchen and opened the cabinet under the sink where I'd put a folder 3 hours earlier. Receipts, bank statements, screenshots of transfers. Every major purchase going back to the day we moved in, organized by date, printed from my home office printer on cardstock because I wanted them to feel substantial. She picked up the first page. I watched her read it. She set it down without finishing it. She walked to the bottom of the stairs and called my husband's name. Then she remembered he wasn't home. She stood there for a second in the hallway with no furniture in it, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked uncertain. My husband got home at 5:40. The movers were on their last load. He stood in the driveway for a long moment, looking at the truck. Then he came inside and found me in the bedroom, boxing up the last of my clothes. He said, "Claudia, what is this?" I said, "I'm moving out." He both said I should. He said he didn't mean like this. He said I was being extreme. He said his mother was really upset. I turned around and looked at him. I asked him, "When was the last time you asked how I was doing?" He didn't answer. I asked him how much he thought we spent monthly on this house. He said he didn't know, between 800 and 1,000 maybe. I held out my phone with the banking app open, the real number, the full number. He scrolled up, kept scrolling. His face did something I hadn't seen it do before, not exactly shame, more like someone recalculating a sum they thought they understood. "You paid for all of this," he said. I said, "You never asked." Downstairs his mother was on the phone. I could hear her voice tight and controlled, talking to someone, probably his sister, explaining what was happening in the version of events where she was the victim. The last box went in the truck at 6:15. I checked into a hotel 20 minutes away. Clean room, quiet floor, a bed I could stretch out in. I ordered Thai food and ate it sitting cross-legged on the white duvet and watched a show I'd been meaning to watch for months and couldn't because someone always wanted the TV downstairs. My phone rang 9 times between 7 and 10 p.m. My husband 3 times, his mother 4 times, his sister twice. I let them all go to voicemail. I slept 8 hours straight. The next morning I did 3 things before I made coffee. I called my bank and removed my husband as an authorized user on the joint account we'd set up for household expenses. I transferred the balance to my personal account. I called the utility companies, cable, electric, internet, water softener. I explained that I was no longer a resident at that address and would not be responsible for future billing. I called my insurance provider and removed his mother's vehicle from our policy. Then I made coffee. By noon, my husband had called 11 more times. His texts went from confused to frustrated to something that was trying hard to sound reasonable. "We need to talk. This isn't fair. My mom is really scared. Can you please just come back so we can discuss this like adults?" I read all of them. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded one email to my mother-in-law's address, which I had because I'd been the one managing household correspondence for 2 years. It was a simple, professional note. It said that effective immediately, I would not be funding household expenses for a residence I had been asked to vacate. It listed the accounts and subscriptions that would be ending. It was 3 paragraphs. I read it 4 times before I sent it. Then I called my accountant. Here is where it gets interesting. My accountant, who I had not spoken to about any of this before, listened to what I told her and then asked me to send over the documentation I'd compiled. I sent it that afternoon. She called me back the next morning and said she needed to ask me something. She asked whether I remembered signing anything related to the mortgage when we moved in. I said I remembered signing a lot of paperwork at various points, but couldn't remember exactly what. She told me to look for a copy of a Cope or Thrower addendum. I found it that evening in a folder of documents I'd scanned and saved to the cloud 2 years earlier without fully understanding what I was signing. At the time, my mother-in-law had handed me a stack of papers and said they were for tax purposes. My accountant had mentioned something similar could help us all. Tax efficiency, she'd said. I'd signed without asking enough questions because I was 28 and overwhelmed and trying to be a good daughter-in-law. My accountant called it a significant discovery. My lawyer called it leverage. I hadn't planned this part. I want to be clear about that. I didn't move out with some master scheme to claim the house. I moved out because I was done. What I found was just a truth of paperwork I'd signed in good faith. Paperwork my mother-in-law had handed me without explaining. Paperwork that now had legal weight I hadn't anticipated. My lawyer sent the letter on a Thursday. Formal, measured, specific. It outlined my documented financial contributions over 30 months. It referenced the co-borrower addendum. It proposed either a structured reimbursement arrangement or a formal review of property equity. It was not a threat. It was just a statement of what existed. My mother-in-law called me from an unknown number that Saturday morning. Her voice was different, quieter. The careful, controlled tone was gone, and in its place was something rawer, more tired. She said I was tearing the family apart. I said, I was asked to leave. She said, not like this. I said, I didn't know another way. There was a long silence. Then she said, I didn't know you were paying for all of it. I believed her, actually. I think that was the hardest part. I don't think she knew. I think she accepted the comfort of the house without looking at where it came from, the way people accept warmth without thinking about who's tending the fire. That's not innocent exactly, but it's different from malicious. Still, not knowing doesn't cancel the debt. My husband came to the hotel again, this time without anger. He sat in the lobby chair across from me and looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping. He said his sister and her boyfriend couldn't afford the house without my contributions. He said the mortgage payment had already come back from the bank with a notice. He said his mother was applying for a HELOC and getting denied. He said, I didn't understand how much you were doing. I said, I know you didn't. He asked if I wanted to try to work on it. Marriage counseling. A real conversation. He said he'd been talking to his therapist, the one I'd been paying for, and that he understood he'd been making himself invisible to the reality of our finances, and that wasn't fair to me. I didn't say yes and I didn't say no. I said I needed time to think. What I knew, sitting in that lobby, was that I was not the same person who had moved into that house 30 months earlier. That woman had believed that love meant filling in every gap quietly. She had believed that if she just handled enough, eventually the balance would shift. She had believed that being needed was the same as being valued. None of that was true. The house sold 4 months later. Not because of my lawyer's letter exactly, but because the numbers didn't work without me in them, and nobody in that household had the income to make it work alone. My mother-in-law moved into a smaller rental near his sister. My sister-in-law and her boyfriend rented an apartment. My husband moved into a one-bedroom near his job. I didn't take anything I wasn't entitled to. The reimbursement my lawyer negotiated was fair and documented, and I put half of it into a savings account and used the other half as a down payment on a condo I chose entirely by myself. I picked the neighborhood because I liked it. I picked the floor plan because the light came in from the east. I bought a kitchen table that was just mine, and I ate breakfast at it every morning and didn't have to calculate what I owed anyone for the privilege. My husband and I did 6 sessions of couples counseling. I went because I wanted to understand what had happened, not because I'd already decided where we were going. By session 4 I knew. I filed in January. He signed without a fight. I think he understood by then that fighting would require him to defend a version of events that he couldn't quite stand behind anymore. I don't tell this story because I want anyone to feel sorry for me. I was not a victim in the end. I was someone who made a decision at 2 in the morning, on top of the covers with my shoe still on, and then followed it all the way through. What I want people to understand is that quiet sacrifice isn't invisible just because nobody acknowledges it. Somewhere in bank records and receipts and the small daily facts of a life, it's all there. Every payment, every transfer, every month you covered because you believed in something that wasn't covering you back. I moved into my condo on a Saturday. It took 4 hours. I didn't need the full-service movers because I didn't have that much stuff yet. Just what I'd taken that October afternoon and some new things I'd bought in the months since, one at a time, because they were exactly what I wanted. I made coffee in my kitchen and stood at the window and watched the street below and felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Quiet. The earned kind, not the quiet of someone holding herself still so she doesn't disturb anyone. Just quiet and mine. I think about that 2 a.m. a lot, shoes still on, ceiling above me, the specific kind of stillness that comes after something cracks open. What I've come to understand is that nothing in what happened to me was random. Every consequence followed directly from a choice, theirs, mine, or both. My mother-in-law accepted comfort without curiosity about where it came from. My husband chose ease over honesty with himself and with me. And I, for 30 months, chose silence over clarity because I confused sacrifice with love. All of those choices accumulated. All of them landed somewhere. That's not fate. That's just how things actually work. What I got wrong for a long time was thinking that doing the right thing quietly would eventually be enough. I was doing right by my family. I was honest with my money, responsible, consistent, but integrity without self-awareness only goes so far. I was covering a $7,200 monthly gap and had no clear picture of what I was building or who it was for. That's not wisdom. That's avoidance dressed up as generosity. The moment I sat down with my accountant, the moment I actually looked at the numbers I'd been living inside for years, something shifted. Not because the numbers were new, because I was finally willing to see them. That's the thing nobody tells you about being smart with your life. It's not about credentials or income or knowing the right people. It's about being willing to look directly at what is true even when the truth is inconvenient, even when it means admitting that you built something on the wrong foundation. I had the financial documentation. I had the receipts. I had the co-author paperwork I'd signed without reading closely enough. All of that existed before I left. The difference was that I finally decided to understand what I actually had. And then there was the matter of following through. That part I want to be honest about because it was not easy. The morning after I decided to leave, I made coffee and kissed my husband on the cheek and waited for the door to close, and then I called the movers. And then I did the next thing, and then the next. There were moments in that hotel room, on the second night, on the fourth, where I almost picked up the phone and said, "Never mind, let's just figure something out." That pull was real. Ending a marriage is not a clean feeling. Moving away from people you loved, even people who failed you, has a weight to it that doesn't get easier just because you were right to leave. What kept me moving forward wasn't anger. Anger burns out. What kept me moving was a decision I'd made about who I was going to be after this. I was not going to be someone who went back to being invisible because visible was harder. I was not going to let 30 months of real work and real money and real care mean nothing because it was easier to pretend none of it happened. Claudia, the woman who signed those papers at 28 without asking enough questions, And Claudia, the woman who handed her husband a phone showing him the real number, those two women were not the same. The distance between them was not luck. It was the accumulated weight of every small decision to do right, to think clearly, and to keep going even when keeping going felt like the harder road. I moved into my condo on a Saturday. I stood at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee and watched the street and felt quiet in a way I hadn't in years. Not the quiet of someone making herself small, the quiet of someone who finally had enough room to just be still.